Hello. I think I have to start now because we're running out of time. Sorry. Sorry interrupting. Okay, I think there are more people outside, but yeah, in a minute. I'm Burçak BINGÖL. I'm Turkish and I came from Istanbul for this talk. And what I'm gonna show you today in this 15 minutes is one of my recent sculpture actually. I'll start from there. This is sculpture, this is ceramic sculpture that I made for my latest show. And its name is Cruz, but actually it has this Turkish title which I prefer to use because it has double meaning. It's the title, the Turkish title is Seyir, and actually in Turkish it means like both cruising and watching something. So I thought that it makes more sense with the work I do because I'm not sure if it's obvious, but it's a truck. And it's casted from a real truck and made out of ceramics material, which I'm hoping to show you a bit of the making process of it. And the thing is, Seyir is like, the vehicle kind of suggests this idea of cruising, changing places from one point to another. And the watching is also, after making the sculpture, so it becomes an object that we look at and it becomes a solid material. And so that's why I prefer Seyir better than the cruise, because cruise just suggests the one meaning of it. And actually, this is the final object that I've been working on, this theme, alienation, for a while. And my talk will be about this project only, but I'd like to show you two more projects that ultimately leads to this one. And actually the first project that I worked on between 2006 and 2009, the name of the series is Alien to Itself. As I said, the truck itself kind of suggests this movement and changing places. So it is the whole story about these projects actually comes to my own moving in between the cities and places. So I'd like to just talk a bit about that. Actually, in 2006, I spent 6 months in New York for residency at Hunter College in the ceramic department. I come from the ceramic field. I studied ceramics, and that's my major material. And after spending that time in New York, I went back to my hometown, which is Ankara, the capital of Turkey. After going back, the feeling was kind of strange because I was feeling more comfortable here than my own city that I grew up. And actually, that was the time that I started to alienate the objects from their original context. So this is the first object that I worked on back then. And this is another object under this theme again. And actually, these objects kind of hold this collective memory because this is Turkish people would know right away that it is originally it's a very cheap container, plastic container, and that people stuff like food or some materials, and you can just buy it for like very cheap. And transforming those sort of objects into something precious, because ceramic has this preciousness in it as a material. So I was just trying to create a gap between the form and its meaning. And this is another object. It's a gas bottle. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but the Turkish community or maybe the region is quite familiar with it. And that was also the time that I especially focused on the decoration and this beautifying the object. And my works until then actually didn't include that, and it was some sort of a taboo in the art that, being decorative or being too beautiful is something that you should kind of avoid. So I just wanted to I just wanted to find ways to incorporate those sort of beauty into the objects that I was making. And this is the object that I did in 2010. Actually, then, at the time, I moved to Istanbul. And yeah, maybe I should continue for the next. And in Istanbul, this is my show in Istanbul, the first show in Istanbul. And actually, at the time, since it was my first show, I thought about creating some sort of cabinet, because until then I had other projects in other places, but I thought about making my own cabinet that holds all these objects or ideas or meanings into it. And this is, as I said, there are two projects ultimately coming to this seyir, the big truck. So this is a second project, the unforeseen transformation, and it was one of the installation. It was one of the pieces in this show. And actually, what I did was, all these objects that you saw before, I collected all those objects into this single room that covered with this specific wallpaper. And so they kind of started to become like each other's, and that was the aim behind this project. And because I was new in Istanbul and kind of looking for the right place for me to live. As I said, like from New York to Ankara, I felt like quite alienated. And then in Istanbul, somehow I found myself in Istanbul and then started to actually search something about my own background, own origin, like culturally, I mean. And this was I call it some sort of visual wish that I was trying to basically create some sort of integrity between the work I do and myself and my surrounding. Actually, let me show you these are the objects, as I said. And all those alienated objects just went into the single room that became like one. And that's why I kind of included myself to that project too. And as I said, to find a unity between, of course, it's some artistic and visual wordplay maybe, and these are the works from there. And this is actually, I should mention a bit about the pattern here. This is a pattern that I looked for in Istanbul, probably in every store, and because I was looking something like green and alive, like an ivy, because it suggests this idea of transformation. And and when I was looking for this pattern, I was keep saying that, those Victorian patterns that covers everything in time. So, but the word Victorian was very strong in my search, and I will come to that later on. And yeah, then actually that search for a unity kind of manifested itself to this project, which I did in just recently, as I said, and it's a part of this. Part of my latest show, A Carriage Affair. Carriage Affair, actually, it is a novel. The name comes from a novel that written by Recaizade Mahmut Ekram in 1896. This is Ottoman, and this is the original version of the car. And actually, in the book, there is this character, protagonist, Bihruz Bey. He's so into French culture. He lives in Istanbul, but so into French culture, and he speaks French to the salesman, but fails to understand the French language like well. So the whole novel is constructed on these misunderstanding, and that the writer kind of criticizes the wrong Westernization. And so actually, what I was. With the truck, actually, yeah, I skipped that part. That's an important part. When I moved to Istanbul, I realized that alienation was not just personal, but also there was the social layer of it, because Turkey, as you know, it's like literally between the East and West. And so it might look like a European city, but there's also an Eastern spirit in it, and it's kind of, it also it creates some sort of alienation in the society, but at the same time there are like possibilities in that area that hard to define. So anyway, then I thought this book would be, I mean, name of this book would be a good title of the show. And then, yeah, this is again from the book that Bihruz Bey and his French tutor talking about art and philosophy in French. And yeah, this is the current version. I mean, this is my own version of the book. Now, I mean, this is the alphabet that I can read, of course. I mean, the previous alphabet is from the Ottomans, so I cannot read that. I'd like to talk a bit about the decals decoration on the truck, because those are like typical Islamic patterns that I use, and these are my like tests on the computer. But I'd like to show a bit of the how I did the decoration, because as I said, like coming from this old Victorian patterns to my own culture's pattern was some sort of like awakening, let's say. And actually, that was the time that I realized that since I'm very interested in pattern, but somehow I was putting a distance between my own tradition and myself. So, and that was the time that I started to focus on the Islamic patterns. And actually, on the truck, I use them, but it's not easy to understand at first because I kind of fragmented them and I played around with the scales. And actually, the pattern on the left is actually the source of the patterns on the right that I used for the truck. And what I did is I just took the templates, like already made templates, and took pictures of the chini. We call it chini, and I think it's an interesting word to mention because chini means belong to China in Turkish. And this comes from this, like, from this Silk Road trade that, you know, all these porcelains, beautiful Chinese porcelains were coming along from the Ottoman to the Europe. And these chini works kind of inspired from those porcelains. And I just wanted to use the images of them behind the templates to create some sort of a compilation of history. And yeah, this is the decal work on the surface. And yeah, it's like the vehicle, the truck suggests this idea of moving forward, and then the decals actually holds like lots of layers of different images from the chini world. And so I just wanted to kind of make a clash between the past and the future onto the surface. And this is actually how it looks like in the space. It's as I said, it's molded from an actual truck, and it was actually a pavement truck of Istanbul. So they gave me the truck for a weekend only, and we cast it in 2 days. And then I worked on doing it like in 6 months. Maybe I should show a little bit about the making process of it. These are different stages of making it, and actually in the top square up there you can see the truck itself with silicone molding, and the other, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the ceramic process, but it's really difficult and stressful. And but yeah, when I look at this video, I really literally feel pain in my stomach because it was, I'm serious, like it was such a painful times. And yeah, but when you're done with the work, you kind of alienate. I mean, when I look at the truck right now in the gallery, in the studio, I really don't feel anything. So that's why I tend to just record everything to remember later on. I mean, this is what I do for many of the work, and this video was in the show just to give some informative, background of the making process. yeah, actually, I'm in the mold right there, so it's quite big and scary. Actually, I remember the time that we did the molding, and the guys were helping me, and then we put the mold down there, and that was the time that when I saw the mold there lying in front of me, that was the first time that I felt like, oh my God, what am I doing? Because this was a crazy idea, but somehow I'm obsessed with the idea of like casting a truck, and because I needed that big of an object to express that alienation of the country or society was facing, and I think it's a great metaphor that it moves, and there is this, and when it moves, there's this transformation, because every journey has this transformative effect that when we move, when we change places, we're actually somebody else. So, so it's just like the culture and the society, I guess. It changes constantly, and the transformation is unavoidable. And yeah, so yeah, this is the project of mine. I guess I'm on time. I really wanted to hear that music, but
Hi everyone. Please play the video. Thanks. My name is Shurui, and this video you are seeing is about a piece from 2012. When I had my first solo exhibition in Beijing, and this is the title, The Shelter. And this installation is made up of 106 paintings on a red carpeted platform and lighting. This work is like a kind of self-portrait, combine the paintings and architecture, the forms together. And here's the back, shows the structure. It's a big installation, like 6 meters high, 3 layers. And all my painting is use a scale of airbrush with acrylic. Okay, I'm come from Chongqing, the southwest part of China, and I'm so glad at the beginning of my art, I found my direction, and this is a work I did in 2001, which I was in the school, and it's made by the mosquito net and the bamboo. Because in my education, we don't have anything about abstract or space or, yeah, all the education in China, the fine arts, it's about realism. And in 2004, I began to use the airbrush to do the painting. The obsession with the light comes from seeing big explosion images from movies. That's what I started painting, and that really got me more interested in and thinking about how much space I can create with different ways of showing light. In 2004, I moved to Beijing because I got a job as an assistant of an older artist. And before, I think myself is an artist, which I can do installation, but when I'm living in Beijing, there's no resources to do installation. Also, I began to have idea to paint about light. This is the first painting about light, which I did in 2005. Actually, it's only one painting, because after this painting, I don't find very strong confidence of my painting, so I stopped. Till 2006, I took pictures of the LED screen in Chinese-style nightclub. So from here, I start to paint those photos as the draft of my painting. Okay. In 2005, I started to work for a gallery in Beijing. That was when I had my first real window into the art market. Everything was so crazy, like the price jumping pretty much every day, and everything can be sold. Also my works. So after 8 months, I have enough saving to quit the job and rent a studio. But I was ignored in the Chinese market. Almost no attention from outside the country. But I still can sell work and do exhibitions in South Korea. But they're all focusing on my painting of light. Finally, in 2008, I had a chance to do this installation, which this one is very important to me. And this is a deconstructed elevator put back in the space with fluorescent light, and the lights shining out of the opening. Okay, here I can show some details of, it's so beautiful, I really love this piece. Yeah. So after 2008, everybody knows the economic crisis coming. So I don't have anything else to do. All the thing I can do is just keep on painting, even I don't know why, I don't know how to sell them. And yeah. This image, I just can't stop paint this image with different color. This is the beginning. Afterwards, like this, and this, and this. Yeah. Oh, this is the end. I put on the highlight. After this period, I really, truly enjoy the painting as a medium. I feel like the painting is really old form. It makes me feel so safe, so comfortable, so familiar, and the simple 4 size, making a frame for a surface that can alter the atmosphere and emotions occurring in front of it. Another painting during that time. And those paintings I keep for myself because nobody wants to show, nobody wants to sell. But I'm so lucky I still can have them now. And okay, after this, I think it was all that that helped me move even closer to the light. It was also making me combine installation and sculpture into a natural way. I was feeling so much and getting lots of ideas through this focus on light and space, almost without trying. So I just keep follow this vision. And this one is also kind of self-portrait. It's my height, 155 centimeter. Okay, here's and the possibilities still seem infinite. It doesn't get boring. I think about all the ways human civilizations have used light and space according to their need, and how these helped develop form, aesthetics, and the connection to all aspects of society and culture. But what I love more than thinking is envisioning the light or seeing what I've painted. I think a lot about how light and space comprise form and the sense of form, which is really at the heart of a person's aesthetics. Last year I was in Egypt, and one of the things that make a deep impression on me was this sense of form, basically appearing the same over 3,000 years. Seeing their historical sites, I could look at how this culture went through all those changes in rulers, religions, and social customs. And it feels abnormal, even perverse, that this one sense of form has persisted. I could see this unbroken line, this smooth string of thought or sensibility that seemed to permeate the culture. For me, that's so different because Chinese civilization has a history that's also thousands of years, but there have been drastic changes in aesthetics and all kinds of other sensibilities, and big changes in value and belief every few hundred years. I have been reflecting a lot on that. What does it mean for those sensibilities to change or not to change? And what are those sensibilities really? As a visual artist, I return to light, the thing that comes before everything visual, the thing that no matter what I look at is what I see. And I think am I so fixated on this because it's a thing under all the sensibilities that cannot change, but takes an infinite variety of forms. To be constant and infinitely various, of course, that is the kind of paradox that is perplexing enough to be an aspect of reality worth obsessing over. Maybe that's close to what it is. It's hard for language to express deep feelings in the visual arts, I guess. It can turn into too much logical analysis, which is never enough. Finally, I finished this paragraph. Sorry, even it's like a robot. Okay, finally to 2011, I had my song. I delivered my song in January, and in March I took a part in this exhibition, which was curated by Karen Smith, and it's a big installation. It's a big painting. This painting is 28 meters long. And by this one, I just proved myself as a female artist who still can produce and develop new works. Yeah, so after this, the galleries in China, they contact me. Yeah. And this is a work I did in 2012. So you can see it's not surface anymore. I did the frame of the painting itself, and the frame is more thick. No, I forgot. Yeah. Yeah, you can see it by this angle. And this painting, yeah. Maybe I shouldn't show that much painting. And yeah, from last year, I began to develop this kind of form with painting. So this one, it's my new solo show in Beijing, which I did in April this year. But those three paintings actually are from 2009 because nobody showed it, so I just keep it for till now. And this is it's a new sculpture, which I try sculptures in recently. You can see the detail. Oh, okay, it's done. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you, Lisa, Shin, and everybody at Asian Contemporary Art Week to invite me and give me the honor of presenting with a lot of fantastic speakers. I'm not a very good public speaker, so please forgive me if I do something silly. I'm a director at a gallery called Grey Noise in Dubai. My background has been an unsuccessful artist to start off with. Did my BA and then my MFA in fine art, and eventually went into art education in Pakistan. I was brought up in the UAE, and I've been transiting between, or shuttling between Pakistan and Dubai, where my parents live now. The past 6 years have been an inquiry into looking at things such as representing artists from South Asia, which I started off in Lahore where the gallery began. And during the course of time, I have been expanding this research into various other cities. The gallery initiated in 2008 in Pakistan and Lahore, and then I eventually moved to Dubai in 2012, where I'm still working and running the space. And we represent artists from South Asia, which I started looking into Pakistan and also India at the point. And then eventually the departure went into Europe and also looking at Australia. And what binds all the ideas together is the aesthetic or the aesthetic practice, which I'm interested in as a representation. The title of this presentation was actually a recent exhibition which I was asked to put together in Hong Kong, which opened up on the 4th of October. And I'm just going to address a few slides through an artist who is someone I'm very close to, and I've been looking at his practice for the past decade. His name is Fahad Barki. He's based in Lahore and a graduate of the same school where I went to, the National College of Arts, and later he went for his post-graduation at the Royal Academy Schools. And it's important for me to show him particularly. I mean, he has a big portfolio, but I think he reflects what I had started looking into and what I would really foresee into representing at the gallery. The idea of borders and geography was something which I was totally not addressing through the representation. I'm going to quickly read a little excerpt from his current book, which we did with Skira, which is launching in, hopefully, New York in November. It's published by Skira and produced between the gallery and Skira. The essay was written by Murtaza Wali, who's in the audience today. He was very kind. He'd been looking at Fahad's work for some time. And I'm just going to read you quickly a paragraph. Fahad Barki's art can leave one feeling uncertain. Though conceptually rigorous, formally exact, and precisely executed, his paintings, drawings, and sculptures stubbornly insist on ambiguity. They are almost impossible to place, whether narrative scenes or flattened icons. His images often lack a background. Without a specific cultural framework or spatial context to help locate them, they hover in an atopia, or rather a dystopia of infinite reference outside of time and history. And as Fahad puts it, his work basically started off focusing on developing a lexicon of characters that suggest the presence of mythological context. Characters bear traits similar to ideograms or pictograms, yet retaining an anthropomorphic quality. Emerging from his interest in ancient and contemporary sign systems such as religious iconography, wayfinding signs, and corporate logos, his work explores the notion of freeing sign systems from the context in which they are found in order to build a fictional narrative around them. This particular image has been shown quite extensively in various exhibitions, and we've never sold it somehow. But at the same time, it's an important work because it also opened up a lot of debate amongst me and the artists of what my gallery would address and what we would be representing, because being a Pakistani and living in Dubai and representing artists who are not really specifically addressing a geographic connotation through their practice, I think it's challenging because we have exhibited this work and a lot of people have been delusioned on the fact that where it's made, and I think I like that idea. This exhibition, which I worked with on a friend of mine who's an artist, Saira Ansari, we did, and it was almost 9 months of research. I'm not an art historian and I'm not a curator, so for us the challenge was to and we were asked to show an exhibition which would cover a retrospect of Pakistani artists practicing in Pakistan and its diaspora. I'm going to very quickly run by the press release which we wrote, which was very basic because we're not very good with our writing skills. Bringing together a selection of 10 artists, The Importance of Staying Quiet explores the use of formal and informal elements that distill the image or form down to its basics. Works from the presentation span over 6 decades, 1950s to date, featuring prominent modern to significant contemporary practitioners from Pakistan and its diaspora. The selection is not intended to represent the artist's signature practice, but instead looks at specific works produced by them that contribute towards this dialogue. The presence of minimal art from Pakistan is not as well documented and celebrated in comparison to its significance and contribution towards the advancement of critical thought. Advancement of critical thought. The formal aspects of minimalism never took root in the Pakistani art discourse, even though there are many examples of works being produced in this vein. The first generation of Pakistani artists were influenced by Western modernism, which was appropriated both in content and style to give birth to numerous seminal practices that went on to inspire art students and new generations of artists. However, the importance of staying quiet attempts to give a small homage to peripheral practice of the minimal, which now seems to have become almost antonymous with art from Pakistan. Not intended as an historical representation or a survey, the exhibit merely attempts to look at a section of visual vocabulary being produced through a period of shifting ideologies in Pakistani art. This was the presentation, and Fahad's work was placed next to 3 prints by a well-known artist, Zahur al-Akhlaq, and these were his lithographs and studies for his paintings, made in 1980s. These, well, they look empty, but they have. I'll show you the details. Those drawings are by one of my most favorite artists, who has never been shown or been addressed in Pakistani art discourse. Her name is Lala Rukh. She's the only minimalist who actually formally addressed minimalism in her practice, and she's still alive at the age of 66 in Lahore. These drawings were 20 drawings made out of a set of over 400 drawings which she was doing in the 80s, drawing from life. And these are 30-second sketches where she's observing the model and then later looking onto the paper and looking at the body. And in this case, it was a male model. Hamra Abbas, again, well-known artist practicing currently out of Pakistan and internationally. This image which she picked up was the Khana Kaaba, which is the central point where we all Muslims pray. And what the title addresses is quite straightforward. It was a set of 6 images called Kaaba Picture as a misprint, but I was much more interested in the visual than the title. So she was looking at the color black, and then looking at these RGB color palettes, how they mix together and make this dense black. And for us, it was quite important to be placed next to a 1960 etching of Anwar Jalal Shamsa, and that is called 5 Standing Figures. I don't have a close-up, unfortunately, but just to give you an idea of 50 years of practice of art, but looking quite fresh. Ikra Tanveer is a young artist. Again, she's addressing notions of light and also looking at very poetic landscapes around her studio. This is her studio wall and the sunset, which she photographed. Rashid Rana, who's very well known for his pixelated collages and photo sculptures. These photo sculptures were situated around his works he had shown at Listen in London and also in India, where his galleries are. And they are literally photographed objects, then later printed on a UV metal sheet. And the work title of that particular work is called A Plinth from a Gallery in Lahore. This is a work we commissioned to him. This is the recent most work. This is again coming back from earlier work he did called Canvas on Canvas, where he's using the medium and also addressing an image of that particular medium. So it's actually literally photographed canvas, which is the detail. So you see the weave and it's printed on canvas. And the details, usually when you see up close, you see them in pixels. Zahur al-Akhlaq sculpture, which I found on his balcony. He expired in 1997, he died, and he was murdered, in fact. But this particular work was always sitting in his balcony. I'm very good friends with his daughter, and I'd always wanted to show it because these are studies which he did in the 80s around looking at some geometric forms, and they're bronze, quite small works. And we placed them next to a 2014 print by an artist, Sarah Salman, who has done these embossed prints, which you can't see. I think that's the which you have to really experience. But she was also looking at geometric patterns in nature, specifically flowers, and these were embossed prints done in Marseille this year. Aisha Jatoi, a miniature painter, and Pakistani art being pretty much addressed around the aesthetic of miniature painting. She had been doing these autopsies of miniature painting of how the spaces work, and then how she would just define the entire scene. I mean, you have to, I'm sorry, it's just not that great to be shown, but the works, these paintings are original paintings which she like dissected literally, looking layer by layer and making her own spatial divisions, which are quite important. And something similar had been addressed in Zahur Saab's work earlier in his paintings, where he's looking at the page, the manuscript format. Again, a work which is called A Father's Discourse in Love. And she's mentioning all the things which were actually painted, but it's just writing about them and then forming them around just the balance of spaces, how miniature painting, Mughal miniature paintings were designed. This work is called A Lovesick Heroine, where another way of looking at lovesick lady reclining in plush surroundings. I mean, she's just also exaggerating a little bit in writing them, but they're quite beautiful, almost like an autopsy. A wedding. I'm going to end my conversation of whatever time I'm left with, which is probably 2 minutes. A video which is made by an artist I represent. His name is Sharbal Joseph Hajputrus. He's a Lebanese artist, but I think he quite beautifully explains what we address through our program. And I would just let you view it. It's probably not well viewed as a projection, but if you just play the sound, he'd filmed. It's written there exactly on the exact geographical border between Netherlands and Germany. The camera was positioned perpendicular to the ground. The air of one country merging into the air of the other was filmed for 9 minutes. And that addresses what we do at Grey Noise, pretty much so. You can play the video. There are clouds moving, which you can't see, unfortunately.
Thank you for that presentation. I loved all your artists. I'd love to coach some of them. Let's see. I don't turn anything on. Okay. Hello? And it's true, you can't see anything from this podium. If you could turn down the lights a little bit, similar to what you had for Umer, that'd be really helpful for me. My name is Craig Yee. I wanted to thank everybody from ACAW for inviting me to present today. And what I'm going to be discussing today, and I'm going to see if I can get the clicker to work here. Is a semiotic framework for ink. And you may ask, why is this even necessary? The reason why I'd like to speak about this today is because I think when Lisa used the term anachronism or anachronistic in her opening remarks, she may have actually been referring to my presentation. I'm going to be presenting a visual language that has been in use in China for about 2,500 years, but which many contemporary artists are interested in using today to address an international audience. And so the challenge for them is how to use this old language in a way which can be interpreted by contemporary audiences. And this presentation is an attempt to start that process. So I break ink into, and I describe it as a language, with two elements. One is the medium itself, and this is, you could think of this as the materials in which the artist is making marks, forms, and signs. And then the semiosis is the interpretation of those signs into meaning. There are two versions of this talk. One version of this talk is geared towards Chinese painting nerds, so people who might work at the Met or at a traditional art department at a museum. So I'm going to try and focus my remarks to a contemporary art audience, which means that we're going to look at more contemporary art practices as examples of semiosis as opposed to strict semiotic frames. So the first thing I want to do is talk about the medium, and I'll talk about the elements in the medium, maybe in a way that we haven't discussed in the past. The first element is carbon. So ink is made from carbon. It's one of your basic chemical elements. If you remember your organic chemistry, it's the basis for organic chemistry and for the chemistry of life. It's the basis for the carbon cycle for life on Earth, and there's also the basis of the carbon economy, which is causing us so much trouble right now, and the environmental crisis. So specifically, the carbon that we're looking at is what's called amorphous carbon. So it's not like graphite or diamond, but it's amorphous, which means that therefore it's extremely absorbent of light. It has what's called an albedo coefficient of less than 0.01. So an albedo coefficient tells you how much light is being reflected from that material. And so it has an effective albedo of 0. So you can think of this as a universal absorber of light. Most of the carbon in ink is a small molecule carbon, which is just C3, although you have elements, you have molecules as large as C60, which would be a buckyball of carbon. And basically, carbon comes from soot. So you call this lamp black, so it's a burning process, and you can burn either wood or oil and collect the soot, and that becomes the basis for the carbon in ink. The second element is water. One of the things that's interesting about water, it has an albedo of anywhere from 0 to 1, which means that it could be perfectly transparent or perfectly reflective. It's a liquid, so it's the liquid suspension in which you place your carbon. It's also a dipole, which means that it functions as like a universal solvent. So many, many things dissolve in water, and along with carbon becomes one of the basic elements in life. So ink is an interesting suspension of water or carbon in water mediated by glue. So a lot of people don't understand the role that glue plays. So glue coats the carbon granules and makes them hydrophilic, which means it allows them to dissolve easily into an even suspension with the water. The glue also, though, modulates the viscosity or the thickness of the ink. And unlike water, okay, which evaporates, ink remains as an element in the actual finished painting itself. So whereas water has this albedo between 0 and 1, glue in water also has an albedo of 0 to 1. But unlike water, which evaporates, the glue will remain and can preserve some of those albedo characteristics. So it can preserve many of the reflective characteristics of water. And then there's paper. So paper is the ground on which you make your marks. It has an albedo of between 0.6 and 0.8. And so you can look at this as the reflective medium in an ink painting or an ink work. It's basically made of tree fiber. And what's interesting, it's a series of fibers which are randomly meshed into a network. And this becomes important because the fibers themselves become attachment points for the carbon. And this allows you to then create infinite gradations of absorption or reflectivity of light between the ink and the paper. The capillary, the fiber structure, also you have these empty spaces within the fibers. And this allows the ink to then bleed into the paper through the capillary structure. So this dissolving or this dispersal structure that you see is because of the structure of the paper. Now what's interesting is water has this transparent quality. So when you mix ink and water, what happens is the ink makes the water visible. Now if you can imagine what would happen to the sample after a few minutes, you would imagine that the ink would completely disperse in the water and you would get a nice sort of lighter tint of the ink. Okay? Now what happens is when you apply this ink and water on paper, paper actually absorbs the ink and the water and captures and freezes that process of diffusion. So what you see is when you actually combine the ink and the water on the paper freezes the process of diffusion at a certain point and actually exposes something which normally passes by unnoticed in the world. Okay, so normally, this happens momentarily. and it disappears. But then on paper, we end up capturing it and recording it. And so this is ink and water on paper. Okay. The last element is the brush. And the Chinese use brush and calligraphy. So you can think of calligraphy as a combination between writing and gesture. And you can think of gesture as embodying qualities of perception, feeling, emotion, and character. Okay. And so the idea is the brush allows this chain to be completed between the mind, the body, the brush, and then finally the ink. So this chain of action, the gesture is actually a metaphor, or you could almost say an index of what's going on in the mind of the artist. So the brush plus the ink equates to this idea of the mind in action. And then the ink, when applied to paper, is this idea of the mind in stillness. So the two together, you can think of as starting from the point of the mind in stillness, the mind going into action, that action being reflected in the gesture. Okay. These are the same materials, but now applied to painting. And what you can see here is the expressive quality of the ink now comes out. So not just the expressive quality of the brush, but then the expressive quality of the ink together, creating an image or a form. So this is the basics of the medium. Okay. And I just wanted to show that the three work together. And the artist basically starts out with the ink and the brush, loading the brush with ink, and then moves from that to the brush and the paper. So using the brush to apply the ink onto the paper. Once the brush moves off, then the ink in the paper has a life of its own. And so you actually see the ink moving on the paper under its own motivation. Okay. These are the qualities that you can think of as defining the relationship between ink and paper: saturation, density, flow, gravity, absorbency, evaporation. And then between brush and paper, pressure, friction, rhythm, angle, or so brush path angles, and then path and speed. And the things that all these qualities share is that you can think of them as intensive qualities. So intensive qualities are qualities that vary in intensity, so like saturation varying in intensity, or density or flow varying in intensity, and that these differences in qualities cause movement or flow of energy, right? And oftentimes this flow and this intensity varies, is cyclic, or it's alternating. So my definition for, a new definition for the medium of ink is ink as a medium is the intensive deposition of carbon through intensive means. So the intensive deposition of carbon you can think of as the behavior of the materials themselves, and then through intensive means, the traditional way of applying this intensively is through the brush. Okay, so if we then quickly move to semiotics, I'll just quickly point out what we're not going to talk about, which is the linguistic foundation for semiotics. And I'm going to talk briefly about this idea that mind is transcendent over body. This is not an idea that carried much currency at all in East Asia. And this division between bodily perception and, bodily cognition and then mental cognition, the separation between the two. But instead you have this idea that mind and body is one entity, or that mind and consciousness is embodied. So this is the notion that really dominates most East Asian thinking and is really what's reflected in the medium itself, in the language, the semiotics of ink. So what we're really looking for is we're looking for an embodied kind of semiosis, where what was formerly a dichotomy is really a continuum. And so this is the kind of semiosis we're looking for. Well, you can do this by shifting the metaphoric ground for semiosis from language to vision, or really from any perceptual process. So like I could use an oral metaphor as well. And what I'm not going to go through is the embodied semiotic structure that C.S. Peirce or Charles Saunders Peirce, an American pragmatist, comes up with. If you were a Chinese painting nerd, then we could really talk about the relationship between this. But the quick idea behind Peirce is that he comes up with a way of thinking about semiosis which is not based in language, but is based in embodied perception. And I think a very simple example of that is the icon, where you assign, which in this case would be the painting, reflects the object or is related to the object, in this case the lotus flower, by simple resemblance, so visual resemblance. It's a perceptual process. And then the association of index, in which something, the sign, is associated with the object through some kind of learned association. So for instance, the lotus in this case, representing wetness or coolness, because the lotus coincides with wetness and coolness. And here a Chinese painter reflecting this through the wetness of his brush. Okay, so there's an iconic dimension, which is the wetness of the brush, representing the indexical relationship, which is the association of the lotus with wetness and coolness. Okay, so this can work all the way up to the symbolic level. Okay, but that's something I'm just going to quickly skip over. What I want to focus on is this idea of interpretation. And I seem to have lost the endings of my words here, but that's okay. One thing that Peirce focuses on is in order for a sign to and an object relationship to have any meaning, it needs to be interpreted by somebody. It needs to be interpreted by a subject or a recipient of that sign. And if we think about this in the context of a way of looking at the world, let's say we have something like the world or nature, and then we have something like a perceiver, human mind. So in the pre-modern Chinese worldview, and what I'm finding is that in most pre-modern worldviews that are not Western, that the two are related by the fact that both are an expression of energy. And so in China, you would call this qi, but you could roughly think about qi as this idea of vital energy. When the vital energy of two particular entities are entrained or connected, you can think of this as resonance. So the Chinese have this concept called qi yun. So resonance, when you talk about qi yun, it can get very, very esoteric, and then people can start talking about it in ways which make it sound very, very inaccessible. But if you think about listening to a piece of music and then feeling your body move to that piece of music, what's essentially happening is the energy of that music and the energy within your own mind are starting to resonate. That's a kind of qi yun. You could also think of if you are listening to a poem or reading a poem, and then the words, and then the rhyme structure, and then the rhythm of the poem elicit a kind of additional meaning or a deeper meaning, and this reveals a kind of meaning. That's also a kind of resonance. Or if you think about sitting with a friend, and they're going through something very deeply emotional, and then just by sitting with them, you can feel their emotion. This also is a kind of yun. So it's actually something that human beings are very much set up to experience. And it's something which other writers and other philosophers have talked about. So in China, Xie was one of the first people to write about this in the 6 dynasties. Heidegger also writes about something similar. He calls it Stimmung, or attunement, the English translation. Another concept that you see in the writing of Deleuze and Delande is this idea of entrainment. And then among cognitive scientists, they have this term enactivism. And so I think there's an interesting candidate neurological basis for this idea of yun. And that's the mirror neuron. And so if you were to just look at these 2 slides here, okay, what's happening here is even across species, one entity, one animal can look at another animal. And just by seeing another entity experience something, what will happen is a set of neurons in your own brain will trigger as if you're experiencing that same thing. And so this becomes the basis for imitation and for empathy and for learning. Now what's interesting, it's also posited that this is the basis for metaphor and for our acquisition of language. Wow. So 15 minutes that quickly. So I won't take up any more of your time, but if you have any questions, please ask me during the question and answer session.
It's hard to see. I wanted to thank to the Lisa and Wangxing and the Ambika and the ACAW for giving this chance. And the whole course is really inspiring a journey to me. And I found in the common that artists who talk through the morning and afternoon, there is a lot of elements which is artists as medium as work, which is water and liquidities and space, and which is all reflect in a way that it has emerging and migrating and reforming all these process. And so I came out in the 80s, which is, I think I remembered the world, the speed almost 60 miles per hour, and now is 100 miles per hour. And which is all the migrations and all the sort of travelings and also all the dynamic between our world and the whole world that change people's view. And as artists, that which has always had this kind of identity or settling this issue, especially with the immigrant. And so you see many artists that are traveling around the world and interact with different places, institutions, individuals. The artists who use that media, which is really create and kind of put themselves in between the media and the audience, which has created the kind of the third space, which you can really see and actually rather to perceive what the experience is. And to me that so you know I remember that the profound change in that kind of the feeling that starting from the first day that I came to U.S., which is 1988, I was in a fellowship in the San Francisco Art Institute. And so I remember my friends took me to the school, and he wants to show me through the way to the school because he wanted me to find a way to come back, which at the time was I was staying in his house. And he gave me the car in case I can find a place. So once I finished all of my, the procedures and process of the registrations, and then on the way back to find his home, I landed in a downtown that I couldn't find a place. And so I look around and I walk in the lobby of the building. There's the receptionist was sitting there. And I went over there and said, "Can I help you?" And I wasn't speaking much English. I said, "I lost myself." And so he said, "What?" And then I gave him my friend's card. And so he called my friend and said, "Hey, so your friend lost himself." But that is kind of a feeling that you feel lost yourself because you wanted to find what the purpose of doing art compare what I was doing in China. And so, which is try to expand the visual language from this ink media. And so, which Craig was already give a lot of detailed scientific data and also idea behind it. And so, so I was, it was in one field that you feel you're floating in a kind of the world that wondering who you are. But since then, actually, your work began into a new stage, which is basically based on the sort of two indexable ground for me, to referring to where I'm coming from and what I'm entering the contemporary art world. And so I worked with ink media over kind of 3 decades. And so the ink media itself, which embedded very heavy historical and cultural content. And so the media itself has its own language, which also resonance is the impulse of the material impulse, and it's a space. and also the idea of the cosmologies. At the same time, which is enable you to facilitate your sort of senses in dealing with sort of conveying the abstract reality, the nature's realities into the abstract realities. But really the content of the ink, which although cannot change, but the meaning can be expanded and broadened. So my center focus and for my work, which is try to expand the territories, expand the potential for the ink to engage with the light and the space, its materiality, tangible same way, and also geometry, and then also abstractions with its emerging process. I wanted to give this. Oops. I may need help watching. But this first one, okay. This is the, okay. So to begin with, which is I want to show the work that is in a process, which is how I wanted to react to the abstraction and light, which is water is essential, and the water is, I view the water as a reflection, as some material that it's always emergent and appealing and disappealing, and at the same time give you a sense of the depth and translucency, which is work really can be enacted with this medium, which is paper. It's penetratable, and event happened both on the surface and underneath, which also I often intruded with the foreign material, which is the acrylic. It actually really can be intensified, the media that I use in the ink. This is the process that I see, and I would refer to the way that how water forms and how it reflects and how that the clarity is, and the same way that how the movement, how that the interaction between all the materials that happen in kind of occurring event. This is the work that the next step, which is I having really wanted to expand its sort of phenomenon that happened with the media, both in the front and the back, and also it's see that how the water travels through the media and all the fractal formations, which also my work is always worked on the ground, happen on the floor, which is there's no certain orientations. All the way that I work with, which is the way also captured to seeing the intersecting with the light, which the work much more expand into the parameters of work outside of work itself. And this is the further sort of movement of the work, which is I wanted to actually bring out the media's intensities and also its the physicality, see its reflections and also the murkiness, and also the you can see the mass and the weight and volumes in the same appearance. And this is the work that started forming on the floor. And see that also all the white area you see is actually the reflection, not actually the color, which I wanted to exempt into this whole work as environmental, as the abstractions, which this is after the dry, and show the trace of the whole phenomenon and fractal movement, both in the front and the back, and this is detail, and this is the finished 2 panels. About 96-inch tall, which is always the reflection with as you move, which is a reflective surface, which is follows the move, which is reflected events as the evolving sort of pieces. And so I live in California, which is, you probably know, the light is extremely intense and also has such a high translucent qualities. If you see the photos of the 20s, the Edward Winston's photos, which is the sand dome that he took at the Oceano, which the sand dome really suggests all the curves of the shadow, which I observed, which has highly the contrast and also has really high translucent qualities. And then this image seems to me it's never sort of stayed in one place. But at the same time, it's really a material. The light is kind of a material that you can sense, you can touch, and you can feel your place in that sort of your placement in that whole connection in terms with the space. And so in the last few years, I have been traveling to Europe and to many places, especially in the church and basilicas. And also, I used the photo of Michael Hield, which is the architecture of photographers and used to be the Guggenheim. And this is the Cistercian church, which is in the southeast of France. It's the medieval abbey, which has its pure form of simplicity, but it's focused on harmony of the light. And so to me, the casting, the shape and the form, and its geometry, and also it's the materiality of the light is extremely important. And I wanted to study that. This is another side of which you really can sense how the light defines the form and the scale. And also you can sense the materials in the air, in the space, which is also the dark. It's not showing well in this slides because the dark has extremely sort of depth and it gives all different tonalities. So, it's in a very material sense, but also at the same time, I think the black, it holds a many depth in terms of the symbolic ways and the cultural references. And so you can see many artists actually refer to the black in many different meanings in different culture. So this is also the work that, I studied how lights that are being distributed in the sort of curvilinear views, and so which is the way that how I look the paintings in the same way that it's not about the painting itself, but it's looking at the diverse view of experiencing that whole parameters of the space. This is the German photographer who did mineral studies, which is exactly sort of approach the same view, which is find a different the depth of the, and it's again in the Euclidean space and point jump the point perspectives compared with also the Chinese paintings in the traditional Song paintings. Either the view that's really also is looking for the freedoms and giving it the perception that it's totally freely can perceive that perceived in a very sort of active way rather than in one sort of views. And this is my work that I refer to these multiple views, and which is geometry dissolved into the material, the organism. And this is my study of the work that is how relate to the space in terms of scale, responding to the light. This is the work that is the space that is converging on image. So the works is responding to the each work and in the different scales and geometries with the dissolved and the resonance of the media and also the reflection of media. With this okay. And these are the work that are also responding to the space in terms of reflections and the geometries, and also sort of emergent and also the sort of emerging and appealing, disappearing sort of in a simultaneously way. And I very much is sort of focused on also the light, that how medium reflected the light. Quickly. And again, this is, material and the medium sort of impulse, which is the work that you can actually see that has its own sort of living sort of resonances that constantly that it's the it's the meaning to the medium. And the same way that I look at this, Sopraminus, the Malavich's work, which is the crack is not called, what it wasn't his intention, but his intention was he described it as the bacteria in the media, in terms of the finding the energies and really bring the living way of the abstraction in the media. The same way that this is my work, which is responded to the natural sort of formations and also responding to the light in terms of the activate this process. This is geometries, which is again, this is the formation of the geometries and the light as well. You can see the detail of these pieces. Wow. I wanted to quickly, this is my current work, which is 3D render. It's going to be shown next year. It's the curvilinear space that I created, which is giving a continuous of the view, both and see the detail. You can see the top, that's the shape of these pieces that I rebuild interior space, and both in the detail, space is not object, but at the same time, the way that you see in the macro and the micro way, in the same ways. And this is the last piece, which is in the deformulated space, about 30 feet across and 6 feet, 6 meter tall and 30 feet is across. With the user. Okay. Okay. Perfect. I get extra time. Where is it? Well, the light. Well, this image is gone. I guess I get too into it. Forget my time. So. Craig.
How many do we have in this panel? 4 or 5? God.
I took a lot of time.
I know, I did too. But it was good. It's really good.
Okay.
Many of your artists work in monochrome.
Yeah.
Let's see. I'm sorry. Shurui and Chongbin, both of you, I feel like, are dealing with space and light in a very interesting way, but the approaches are very, very different. And I was wondering if you had any comments or any impressions of each other's work, when you saw it. I was actually just having worked with Chongbin, I was really struck with how there's a common set of issues that are being dealt with in radically different ways.
Well, I think is the sorry the name Shurui, yeah, I shouldn't remember in Chinese. So is that she essentially abandoned the paintings to use other medium to paint, which is in deal with the light, and so I think is her work is also explore the very strong way of the media can convey, and so give a whole different way of the perceiving in the light. But the same way is also dealing with the object. In my work, which is I not abandon the painting, but in a way find a language and a medium that can be brought its the capacities in terms of deal with its abstractions and deal with its medium, the meaning of the medium.
I'm not really understand what you're talking about because English is not so.
我是想说，我说你是用那个放弃绘画，用其他的材料来跟那个光跟形体这个来做作品，就是我说我是实际上就是不是并没放弃绘画，而是用绘画来探索光的那种可能性，在绘画里面，包括它的那个材料语言一样。你认为你没放？但你说，你可以说你是。
I don't think I give up painting, and actually I really into painting after the 2009 because before I think that it's just image. It's just image I can bring to canvas and that can bring me money. And after that, I'm really take the like one single painting will takes me half year. So if it's really in love, I wouldn't do that. And I saw your works and I feel something common, like how we use the space, and it's like, and I feel like the painting it's a very ancient or classic way to use your body because you practice the painting skills every day and few hours, and after years that things will control your aesthetic or and I think it's another common thing is we both like big dimensions, right? I feel and I feel like for me it's like I have a weird ambitions because I'm short, but I don't know why I just love the big dimension. Yeah.
We just talked about dimensions and like the largeness of things, and I remember in your presentation about the truck, you mentioned something like this as well. I was wondering why, like where that comes from, this ambition or something else, please.
Actually the project that I was working on is the theme was an alienation. So I was doing all these small objects, and I was thinking that alienation was some sort of a personal issue that I was feeling, and those were my attempts to overcome that feeling or just to make something. I don't know. But as I said, after I moved to Istanbul, it's a I mean, it's the capital of Ottoman, you know, but I'm from the capital of the modern Turkey, which has all these modernist buildings like Bauhaus style, and you don't actually feel history. You know history from the books, not enough. But when I moved to Istanbul, it was like the history was kind of unavoidable. I mean, I always visit the city, but somehow living in it, you see all these like historic buildings or even small fountains, or maybe the way of living socially. So those are all carrying some sort of traces of the past. And actually, when I realized that, so I felt like I living in a different culture. So I kind of felt in between things, and then was the time that I felt, okay, this alienation is like bigger than my own personal issues, but more social, and it kind of involves the whole society actually. And so that's why I needed to do something like big. And as I said, I think it's a great metaphor that it carries some sort of burden. So it's a loaded metaphor that moves, and it is a, you know, yeah, I just thought it's a, and I'm also fascinated by the mechanics and, you know, industrial objects. And there's this, you know, repetition is one of the key theme in my works in general. And in the industry, there is also repetitive, like mass production. So those objects are like, you know, there are thousands of trucks. And I'm also using that repetitive production in my works too. I mean, in most of my works, I don't do anything myself, but I just copy objects. Also in my drawings too, I just copy things. I just orchestrate whatever there is. Also in the patterns, so I use like already existing templates and I photographed the other people's craftsman works to integrate that. Yeah, so yeah, truck and bigness of it, somehow I just needed to do something like that to express.
My question goes to Umer. I really enjoyed watching this show, and I thought it was funny that you kept saying there is something, but it's invisible in the photograph. Thank you for your presentation. I was also struck by the fact that it's quite rare, at least in where I come from, but I think even everywhere, to mix with such subtlety modern artists with contemporary artists, or maybe artists that were from a different generation with younger artists in a way that is quite subtle, so you don't really know who comes when and first. And I was wondering if these this older generation of artists really had a strong influence on the younger, or and if they were in conversation also with other artists that were maybe doing similar works for other reason in other parts of the world, whether China or Europe or...
We actually share, all of us. I also went to the same school where I did my undergraduate degree in fine art, National College of Arts, which is in Lahore. And most of these artists have graduated from that school. Except ACAW, who's gone to, I think, University of Karachi. We definitely have seen most of these artists practice in some sort of a elective seminar, or when you're looking at South Asia art history specifically, which has quite recently been introduced to course, because we are all looking at reproductions. You know, the only biggest problem with Pakistan was, I mean, there's rich history which is shared between India and Pakistan, and of course Lahore was the cultural capital pre-partition. And the school which is situated is, I mean, it has a long history of discourse in contemporary art, and specifically practicing artists. What I mean, like Lala, for instance, this artist drawings, which I showed 20 drawings in this exhibition, everybody knows in the school. She taught for 27 years. She just retired. And she, in fact, initiated the MA program at the National College of Arts, MA Visual Arts. But just the nature of her practice is that, she's someone who just has never dealt with the commercial side of her, life. Like she would gift things, like I have her work. Everybody has her work, which is never just given. And these drawings which I showed, she hates, like literally, she hates these works. And I went and I spoke with her, and we had a nice conversation. In fact, I went for like 24 hours or 23 hours to Lahore and convinced her that it's important, they have to be shown. And what I addressed through my program and the anxiety to start the gallery and start the idea of representation was to introduce practices beyond Pakistan, because I don't think we have that dialogue with the West or with Europe. It's very recent, and most of the artists who've been exhibited, let's say, in the city of New York are represented by Western galleries or like Europe. And I am also very consciously picking up works which do not primarily reflect the whole area which we have discussed in the past 2 days here, which are borders and identities and nationalities. So I think that's why I'm still struggling. I mean, I really have to convince people when they come and see us at fairs, they look at our gallery name and they're like, okay, what the hell is this? Who are these people? Because we're not really promising them to present this specific flavor which they expect from Pakistan. And I think I like that. I like to challenge that. And that's what my program has been. But your question, I have not answered, I think. Sorry. I did, slightly. So yes, influences are there. I think what lacks still is the fact that there has to be a structured South Asia focus on looking at the history of art making, which is weak in my knowledge as an artist when I was there. And we were really reminiscing and obsessed with the West and Europe. And, those were our examples of minimalism never took place and took shape in Pakistan. I mean, very little thread of it is the residue is there, but I mean, you have to really dig it out. And then I'm also exhibiting, not as I said, the signature works of artists, which they're known for, and that is the whole exercise, But we do look into practice of other artists.
Hi, this question is for Craig Yee. I'm wondering, I couldn't figure out what you were. Are you a professor?
No.
Are you an artist?
No, I'm a gallerist, but I am an art educator. And
okay.
I do come from the side of the sort of the Chinese painting nerd side, and am now working more and more on contemporary art. So yes.
Okay,
Question?
so when you were talking about semiotics and you mentioned Peirce, I got chills down my spine because as a student I struggled so much with him. But I was wondering, I mean, you were speaking about ink painting, but really isn't semiotics about mark making? And what would be the difference if it were oil painting? I think, for artists, we make marks. And, could you talk a little bit about that?
So the difference, I think, for the medium is I tried to lead into it with the material analysis of the medium. But the way the medium behaves and the way the artist interacts with the medium is through intensive qualities. So in order to really think about the intensities, yes, there's a mental aspect to intensities, but then there's also a physical aspect to intensity. And so when you start looking at the semiotics, you can interpret the semiotics on the symbolic level, on the indexical level, on the iconic level. All these different marks can be interpreted in those different ways, and the marks are multivalent. But the way you actually interpret, so the interpretance process, that aspect of Peirce's theory, the interpretance process is really one that has to do with, is embodied, and it has to do with intensities. And so the Chinese concept name for this is yun. That's what I was trying to get to. Qi yun is related to energy, and its patterns and its rhythms, and then how the two patterns and rhythms in any perceptive process come into alignment. And so this is happening on I'm arguing on a neurological level as opposed to on an abstract or a conceptual level. And so this is not something that classical semiotics deals with terribly well, okay, but which I think Peirce's framework can, because he goes into embodied perception. And so this is the frame that I would use if I were to construct a semiotic framework for ink. And so that's where I was leading to, didn't quite get all the way there, but that's the basic idea. So intensities are what the medium is about, and intensities are what allow an embodied kind of communication or embodied kind of semiosis. So is that more clear?
Yeah, but I was just wondering why that's specific to Chinese ink painting and not to any other medium. You know, if you look at, I don't know, let's take watercolor, for instance, in the Western tradition. If you look at, you know, the best of John Singer Sargent, you know, details, or even later Winslow Homer, or even in terms of oil painting, you know, the bravado or the sensibility that's contained in any brushwork, you know, what's the difference? You know, because it still has the same, the Chinese may call it qiyun, but, you know, others could call it another name, but it still has the same humanity that is fully expressive, that could be captured visually and only visually.
That's right. So part of what I'm doing is I'm trying to de-cinify what you can find in ink painting. So this idea of qiyun is so much identified with Chinese painting. And for Chinese painting nerds, they try and say, actually, this is a universal phenomenon that you find elsewhere in art. And what I would say is what you find uniquely in ink, though, or the ink artists really focus on and specialize, is this brushwork already is clearly recognized as containing very deep semiotic content. Whereas if you were to look at the brilliant brushwork in, say, a Rembrandt, there's not a lot of semiotic content there. But in an ink painting, because the artist is intentionally using the intensity of the brushwork process to convey meaning through intensities, there is a lot of semiotic content there. So a lot of it is, yes, it can be used, but do the artists actually use it? So.
Is it 5:15? I think we have a break, yes? Thank you so much.